League of Legends world has been abuzz with the debate over this SpectateFaker channel on Twitch. What's the legality of it? What's the morality of it? What the implications on the streaming business? And it's been back and forth. There's been a million different opinions inserted. People have brought up various, as always, they've tried to give examples, brought up various kind of like arguments as to whether it's for or against whatever position they think should be held. I was away for a few days, so I didn't get to jump in on this immediately, but we'll see what we can do here. The problem with this topic is there's a lot to discuss, a lot that can be broken down and actually like taken apart piece by piece. So I don't want to make it like every piece under the sun. We'll just try and keep a lot of this relevant to the importance and how appropriate some of the things that have happened are, and then the implications, So what I'll do is I'll kind of try to just structure it in a way where it makes sense in terms of like people say this and then this is the response, people say this is the response, because if you just break everything down totally separately, some of the points connect and it won't flow as easily and you do it that way. So let's just do a quick timeline for anyone who didn't follow like a million fucking Reddit threads. So a channel exists on Twitch. SpectateFaker is the concept, and it's to watch Faker, who's the best League of Legends player of all time. He's probably the best Korean player even to this day. And when he plays solo queue games, this Twitch channel broadcasts the games using a script which works essentially, and this in itself is an explanation, but essentially there's a way to find out when someone in the game is playing solo queue games. If you know the name of their account, there's a website op.gg, and using all this technology, there's a script that's set up so that when Faker plays solo queue games, this channel broadcasts the game itself using a script to like show the game, record it and show it on the channel. Now, and by the way, the guy who owns the SpectateFaker channel is a guy whose alias is Starlord Lucian. And so I'll try to refer to him as Starlord Lucian from now on, because if I keep using the term Faker, people might get confused, even if it's SpectateFaker, because we're going to be talking about SpectateFaker to SpectateFaker. So they'll just call him Starlord Lucian whenever we're referring to the channel and the guy who owns it. So this channel exists, SpectateFaker, run by Starlord Lucian. It's a Twitch channel that uses a script to find out when Faker is broadcasting games, is playing games of solo queue, and it broadcasts those games just as a third-person perspective, like anyone who can go and spectate in the game if they have the person's name, or they go on to open the client and it happens to show a highly low game and you click spectate, just like that, and then the camera's locked on Faker and you can watch the game and it's on this channel. Now, the timeline follows. That exists. Azubu have a contract with Faker for him to stream onto their service. So to come on with showing his game from his computer with his face camera, with an overlay, that's what they pay Faker for, to stream on their service. But Azubu decides that this SpectateFaker guy, remember Starlord Lucian is in some way violating their licensing, that Faker's streaming, or some kind of copyright issue, or something that they've paid for to now here's the problem, to stream onto their service, which is Azubu, not Twitch. So their implication by sending this DMCA, Digital Media Copyright Act, is essentially to say, like, we own this copyrighted stuff, or you're violating our copyright, you're infringing upon our licensing rights in some way. So Starlord Lucian, you have to take this channel down, like, this is not right. And Twitch sees this, and Twitch's initial reaction, as will always be in these cases, by the way, with like online media stuff, is take it down at first, and it has to be shown that it's not in some way wrong, or you have to kind of like fight against it and make cases as to why it wouldn't. Just because if it turned out it was the problem, then they don't want it to allow it to continue, so then they can somehow be embroiled for lost earnings and all that sort of shit. So anyway, Azubu sends this DMCA notice towards the Twitch channel, which initially causes the issue that it's going to get taken down. The Starlord Lucian guy looks it over. Some lawyers come in, and not like literally just lawyers come in, but as in some people with no understanding of law post on Reddit and make comments, and there's news stories done where it's suggested that actually this DMCA that Azubu has issued wouldn't hold up. It's not actually like legally accurate. Now, people who kept saying it's illegal, I don't know whether that's entirely true. I don't know about law, but it's clearly not correct. Therefore, it's not valid. Now, it is the case that when you do try submitting things like that, and it turns out that you don't have a valid case, the person in question can then, in theory, whether it's the company you're submitting it to or whatever, they can actually now kind of pursue you on legal grounds that you've misrepresented the case and that you've filed a false claim. So in that sense, there's something to be talked about there. Anyway, the Starlord Lucian guy decides, because it's not a legal precedent, that he has to take it down. He's going to fight this. He's going to keep the channel up. Along this way comes Mark Merrill, president and co-founder of Riot Games, the people who made League of Legends and who, to some degree, own it, obviously. I say to some degree, that's its own kind of worms there. Alias Tryndamere, named, obviously that character inside the game's named after him, that wonderful top lane champion. And he makes numerous comments on Twitter, on his personal account, many of which are shown to be initially just inaccurate, then possibly offensive, and oftentimes quite antagonistic in their tone. Faker is eventually consulted on this issue, and yet there's no total resolution of this entirely, because essentially, as far as I can tell, resolution of this would either require Riot to in some way enact their legal rights, or for them to change their terms of service or something like that, so that then there would even be a legal basis to force this guy to stop the streaming and to stop all this sort of stuff, or anyone to stop doing it in the future. So there's a basic timeline of it. Now, before we get into this issue, I just want to make this one point very clear that I've made in previous videos. A really big mistake that you can make as just an average person, it's understandable why, just thinking about the way normal world works, is to confuse morality, questions of what is right and what is wrong on a grand sense, philosophy essentially, of how should we live our lives and what should be allowed and what is the correct behavior in terms of living your life and what is the ideals that we should hold to in our lives. Morality in this area should never be confused with being the same as legislation, which is what laws should we put in place to govern everyday life. What is this person allowed to do? If they do something that they're not allowed to do, what are the punishments? What is the prevention in future of them doing again, or these sorts of things? Those two areas might touch, they might have a little bit of overlap, but if you confuse them entirely, you're going to get into a whole world of problems, which is part of the issue that's gone on in this particular case. Because think about it this way, if all laws were moral and were identical with morality and this notion of justice, then we'd never need to change laws, because they would all just be perfectly in line with what the world should be, and there would never be an unjust law or a law that has to be changed, or a law that becomes outdated, or a law that actually is found to be harming when in the way it's applied. These would never be problems. So anytime morality is invoked, you have to immediately become quite suspicious, especially when this was a legal issue. The initial story here was that someone was having this Twitch channel, someone, Azubu, felt that something was being infringed on their behalf. They contacted him and they told him on a legal basis, you can't do this. And that was the initial story. So it was initially approached on a legal basis. Azubu never said this is morally wrong, like you're taking away potential earnings that we could have, or maybe you're hurting our brand that we're trying to build with Faker here and you're not like a fake. Azubu never went along those lines. That's what Tryndamere came in, and he's gone, as far as I can tell, entirely on that track of this is immoral and this is wrong, and guys, this isn't the ideal that we should be seeking for, and what Riot's philosophy is on how we deal with players and what we want for them, and don't you all want Faker to make money? He's gone from the super hard moral aspect. He's never gone into the legislative aspect of it. And yet these are the two different realms. So it's actually that's what made it such a clusterfuck in some senses. And I've noticed when pressed on the legal issues, Mark Merrill, the Tryndamere guy, continually seems to refuse to acknowledge any of the legislative aspects. Just stick with this moral aspect of like, this is wrong, this shouldn't be doing. And he never even will usually often provide reasoning. He'll just say stuff like, and if you think that's the way it is, then you're harming players. Like just go in completely on that one side, because because here's the thing, when you go on that side, you can just appeal to people's emotions. Oh well, of course I like Faker and I don't want harm to be done to him. I don't want him to be bullied and stalked and all this. You don't go into the legal issues of, well, if you'd said like, well, at the moment there is no legal precedent, stop this and all the rest of it, then people would be like, oh well, now I'm just using my rational brain to look at a thing and ask, is this correct and is it being applied the right way? That's totally different from this emotional reaction that Mark Merrill himself seems to be having and seems to be trying to elicit in the public to get them onto the side of Riot, on the side of Azubu, and on the side of Faker in this particular case. So let's just talk about some of the issues here. First and foremost, one of the biggest problems with this, one of the biggest sources of misinformation was Mark Merrill, aka Tryndamere. I'll see if I can refer to him as Tryndamere now, but it's hard to keep a track of some of the names in this. So one of the big problems is he repeatedly in his initial tweets kept referring to this as a rebroadcast. So now you might think the issue here is, right, Star-Lord Lucian is taking Faker's stream and he's rebroadcasting it. Like, he's just taking the stream from, he's got it open on Azubu in some kind of program or on his computer, and he's taking that stream and he's just pumping it through his computer back up to the internet onto a Twitch channel, and he's rebroadcasting, he's restreaming. Now, were that the case, there wouldn't even probably be any legal ground whatsoever for the Star-Lord Lucian guy to stand on. I'm almost certain the Azubu DMCA would instantly go through and wouldn't be able to be debated on any possible level. And this would not be an issue on any possible sense. Now, if that was the case, we wouldn't even be having this debate. It's not rebroadcasting or restreaming in that sense whatsoever. What's happening is, when Azubu get their stream from Faker, what their stream is, it's coming from his computer, the gameplay is coming out of his client up the internet, with a webcam of him, and in theory, if he used to speak, his voice, etc., and then an overlay over the top, and that's what's coming up to Azubu's channel. Now then, what's Star-Lord Lucian putting on his channel? Not all the stuff I've described there. In fact, none of this stuff. It's not the gameplay coming out of his computer, not the overlay, not the webcam, nothing to do with his voice, anything. What the Star-Lord Lucian guy is streaming is he's essentially just spectating the game as a third person coming in, spectating it, where he can view anyone in the game. You can watch anyone in this game, and he's just choosing out of the 10 people to watch Faker. Now, yes, he's choosing to watch Faker every time. That's just an arbitrary decision at this point in time. So are we saying that if he chose to watch Faker 1 out of 15 games, and 4 out of 15 he watched Guy X on the other team, and then another time he watched, would that somehow make this okay? As in on a legal right, would that make it okay? Would that somehow morally make it okay? And that's an extremely arbitrary point, and I don't really understand where the basis for that's come from. So this is an issue to make, is that it's not restreaming. And the fact that Mark Merrill seems to repeatedly misunderstand this. First of all, he misunderstood it entirely. He kept referring it as restreaming and rebroadcasting. Then it was pointed out to him that that's not the case. Now, he made a tweet saying like, oh, like I understand now it's not rebroadcasting like directly and it's not that sort of thing. But then as far as I can tell from the timeline of things, in Reddit comments after that, he's continued to refer to it as rebroadcasting. And in fact, when SK Telecom or Faker, Kesper, that whole thing, when they made their statement, they referred to it as rebroadcasting. Yet this is not rebroadcasting. I mean, it's rebroadcasting in the sense that you're broadcasting the person's game, but when you keep phrasing it like that, you're going to take the average person who hasn't looked in all details, and then they think, right, rebroadcasting. They're taking his broadcast and putting it there. No. In fact, that's the problem, actually. Yeah, no, now that I think about it, you can't ever use the term rebroadcasting. In what way is he rebroadcasting it? I guess they're rebroadcasting sometimes when it's from a replay, but they're actually just broadcasting. Now, Faker broadcasts one thing, which is entirely a separate way of viewing the game and has all these extra features, and it's actually different in terms of it's inside the client of what Faker's playing. So you can see the fucking mouse clicks, etc., the spells and the cooldowns. Whereas over in the world of the Star-Lord Lucian guy, he isn't rebroadcasting that. He's broadcasting something different, which happens to contain similar components of that. And that's not some kind of... I'm not drawing into some vague moral area there of like, what does that mean, though? Broadcasting elements. It's not some discussion of semantics here. It's something different he's broadcasting. In the same way as another player within that game showing their client on their stream would not be that, even if Faker happens to come into the screen, like for example, say Faker was playing AD carry and they're playing support and they win the whole time, they would not be rebroadcasting Faker's stream, yet they can see a third person model of Faker doing all the shit he does in the game, but not from his point of view with his clicks and with his camera, etc. And so technically, if they just dual queue with Faker all the time and they're always his support and he's always an AD carry, which he obviously plays mid lane, but if that was to happen, they would be doing essentially what Star-Lord Lucian does, except that their camera would be locked on themselves and not on Faker. Is that really the issue, that the camera is locked on Faker? Is that really what people are trying to bring up here? Now, the reason why I bring up this rebroadcasting issue and make this a primary initial point is because this seems to show that Mark Merrill, even to this day, doesn't understand the technology that Riot themselves have implemented. Because he keeps bringing up all this stuff about how this is stalking and bullying and all the rest of it, and yet they're the ones who provide the technology that allows this and will continue to allow this to happen until they themselves stop and take away some of it or put in preventative measures. This actually reminds me of an argument I once saw online, which was a great example of someone who, when they put it onto moral grounds, seemed like they were in the right. And if you actually looked at the technical details, as far as I can tell, got almost everything wrong. So if you've ever watched the Joe Rogan podcast, it's called The Joe Rogan Experience. Joe Rogan's a comedian who's also a commentator for the UFC, MMA. And on an episode of his podcast, he would often have on friends of his who were comedians. He had on this comedian, Bill Burr, who's a really funny guy. He's a great sort of like salt of the earth type guy with great humour. And when they had Bill Burr on, this is a really early episode, they, like in the hundreds, when they had Bill Burr on the episode, Bill Burr's talking about how he's got his own podcast, this audio podcast that he releases every Monday morning podcast. It's really funny, by the way. I'd check it out if I were you. And when he releases this podcast, there's a separate service called Stitcher, which is like a way which can like host podcasts itself, and you can go there and you can get podcasts via this thing. I assume they've got an app now at some point in time. And on Stitcher, I think it was Stitcher from what I remember, they had taken his podcast and put it onto theirs. And so he was really upset about this, and he was saying, like, I didn't give them the rights to put it on there, you know, like, I want people to go to my website to get the podcast, and that way they'll see my sponsors, and they'll go through all my, and then also I haven't licensed it to them, and I haven't given all that. And what he didn't understand, right, which this third person on this, so Joe Rogan's on it, Bill Burr's on it, and the third person is this guy called Brian Redban, who's like the technical advisor for Joe Rogan, who like ran the stream and knows a lot about computers and just basically understands technology, okay. What that guy tried to explain to Bill Burr over and over was that they didn't do any of that. Like, they didn't go to your website, like, steal the content and upload it onto theirs. What happens is, essentially, anyone can link to your... First of all, anyone could link to the MP3 file, because the way that Bill Burr was doing it, as a lot of podcasts are, it had an RSS feed, which you don't have to know the details of, but essentially it's a page where it's listing like the links to the MP3 files, which then programs use the data from the RSS feed to put into stuff like an iTunes type scenario where it's going to list all the podcasts and people can download it through those apps, etc. The technology there, this RSS feed, meant that anyone could, on their website, have set it up like this so that you could download Bill Burr's podcast from their website. It wouldn't technically be from their website, it'd be coming from his, but through theirs. In the same way, Stitcher, as far as I can tell, in this sense, was just using the RSS feed. They were just sort of passing them and taking the podcasts, and then it was coming through their service. So Bill Burr was failing to understand. He was thinking that this was some sort of malicious thing, whereas what he didn't understand was the technology he himself was employing, RSS feeds, was directly not only enabling this to happen, this podcast to go where he didn't want it to, but always had and would have let anyone do it and would continue to. And now, he could disable it tomorrow and he'll have to find some other method to do a lot of this stuff, but that's what he was failing to understand. And so he just kept putting all the blame onto this moral aspect of, well, I own that technically and they haven't asked my permission and this is just wrong and I want people to go through the site. Do you see why I'm bringing this issue up? Because this is the same shit with this Faker Azubu streaming issue here and Riot, because Riot seem to be negligent or just refusing to acknowledge that they're the ones providing the service to do this, that technically, just with the RSS thing, anyone can do this right now for any player, as long as you know their in-game name, you can use OPGG and you know what the fuck you're doing. You can go and you can stream their games. Now, not stream their games, you can go spectate their games and then stream it if you want, but when you spectate their games, it's not the case that you are only watching that one player. It's up to you who you watch out of the 10. And again, I don't know why that's even being brought into the mic. You can watch any of the 10. You just happen to choose this one. You're actually limiting the amount that you can watch. You can watch everyone in the game if you want. So the issue all became about, should Faker make the money this way? But on the legal aspect, I don't think there's any actual grounds as far as I can tell. Now, here's what's interesting as well. What it turned out was that when you go and look at what Riot call their legal jibber-jabber about this issue, they even have a sentence that I'll read out. It says, we'll start with our golden rule. You can use League of Legends IP, intellectual property, as the basis for a fan project that you're giving away for free or that's generating ad revenue. Now, the big problem here is, first and foremost, let's go with that aspect, for a fan project. Fan project, right. Well, I'd imagine that having a Twitch channel that just spectates Faker's games, solo queue, from a third-person mode, which is entirely allowed in the spectator aspect, and has all this technology within Riot's own technology, their own API that allows you to do this, I'd imagine doing that because you're a huge fan of Faker and streaming it on this separate stream. That doesn't in any way infringe on what Faker's offering as his licensing aspect to Azubu, which, as far as I can tell, he might not even be allowed to license that. Riot's essentially just turning a blind eye to the legal aspect of that, as far as I can tell. So anyway, they're not infringing that at all. That sounds like a fan project to me. Now, here's the thing. It says there, if you're giving it away for free. Now, I'll quickly bring this up because an issue was that at some point, the Star-Lord Lucian guy made some mistakes as well here, where he said some things and then apparently he changed his mind later, which, by the way, you're allowed to change your mind. But unfortunately, he said things as if it was sort of like, well, if X happens, then I'll do Y. And then X happened, and he was like, yeah, I think I'm going to do Z instead because of A. Well, that's fine. It just... People are going to always bring that up and like, oh, you're a liar, whatever. I don't think that's a problem. But one of the problems is, it was essentially suggested at first that, like, oh, he's doing it for free, so that should mean this isn't an issue. Now, first of all, if there's a legal right here, I'm not entirely sure that just doing it for free would have worked anyway. There are things like fair rights usage where maybe if he'd added some commentary over the top, maybe he could have got away with it in that sense. But ignoring that, it says here that you're allowed to give it away for free. So now whether he did give it away for free or not, because apparently he later on added like some sort of sub button or something and was giving money to charity. Regardless, the next part of the sentence says all that's generating ad revenue. So this sentence in itself seems, on my basic layman understanding, to justify this entire project. Riot's own words themselves. And yet they're the ones then presenting exactly what is following to the letter of this thing here as some sort of like heinous abuse of their system and like disgusting and this is morally wrong and like, really, is it? Like I said, this is the third person view that happens to be on Faker. Remember that. Here's the problem with this. This would be so much easier as an issue for people to understand if this was a fucking first person shooter game, right? And Faker, when he streams, has his first person mode. And if you spectate it and you're not Faker on his computer, you couldn't see first person. You could only see third person. You could only see the model moving around. Because first of all, no one would really watch that. No one would watch someone just a third person model moving around. When for a first person shooter, you want to see the first person mode. And it would at all times be very strictly defined to everyone watching that they would understand, right, I'm not watching a rebroadcast of Faker's streamer here, because Faker's streaming's a different perspective and component of this base gameplay thing, which is apparently owned by Riot, not Faker or the person doing the third person streaming. They would understand the separation here, but it's because League of Legends itself is third person anyway. So Faker's own stream, yes, it has the mouse clicks in and it has the camera, etc., looks vaguely enough like that first of all, the separate Faker stream by the Star Illusion guy can be enjoyed, and beyond that, it's not as immediately apparent that this isn't the same thing. And then the issue becomes people think to themselves, right, well, if Faker's saying it and he's showing it on this stream, then the things shown on his stream must somehow be owned by him and part of that. As far as we can tell, his model moving through the server in that particular way, aside from like maybe the footage of it specifically coming out of his computer captured by him, that might in some possible weird sense be owned by him, but the same thing but coming through the Spectator client, it doesn't seem like that is owned by him. So that's a key thing to make. Another aspect to bring up quickly on this is people get so mad about the fact that initially, apparently the Star Illusion guy, it was suggested that he doesn't show the stream while Faker's streaming. And so people were like, well, that's not as bad. And then later on they were like, but he does do it. And Mark Merrill was like, look at this. Like, again, that's not really an issue, because if it's actually legal to do this, and if it's actually not even that he is infringing directly on the things that would be Fakers in him, and he's not rebroadcasting, then when he shows it, it's pretty much irrelevant. I mean, for a start off, Faker is not selling to Azubu, despite the fact it might say exclusive rights, etc. Faker is not selling to Azubu the idea that he is the only person whose third-person image of him moving through a public solo queue game server will be streamed on their service. That will be the only play. That is not what he's selling them. Because remember, someone who queues up in the same game as Faker can see that. Someone who goes to OPGG, uses his account, spectates it, can see that through their client, and they could also stream it to themselves through Twitch and watch it. Well, there we go. They've already given, Azubu's already lost out there. Now, it might be the case that Azubu might make less money because of the fact that, unfortunately, like I mentioned, in League of Legends, that third-person view like that isn't that much different, really, than Faker doing inside the game, especially because, unfortunately, an issue people haven't brought up here is, because Faker isn't the odd one, giving us hilarious jokes and comments and stuff over the top of it, really, you only do want to watch Faker to just watch that third-person model go around wrecking everyone. Now, that's not something against Star Illusion. That's unfortunately something against the value of Faker's own stream on Azubu, which is part of the reason why people might not watch Azubu to watch Twitch, which is the preferred platform, over Azubu and Faker's stream. Now, that's an unfortunate consequence of reality, mate. I can't make you have English and do awesome personality stuff. I also can't make it so that the fucking game League of Legends has some different view from your computer that makes it so that people would enjoy it much more. In which case, this would be a moot discussion to have, because no one would watch this guy's third-person view without any of these factors if you had everything going for you like that. No one would watch Spectate Odd One if there was a version, if the Odd One stream himself was doing all the extra stuff I describe that makes it. Remember, that's most of the entertainment on the Odd One stream is the personality added into the game stuff. Remember, on the Odd One stream, you can go and spectate him play without all that shit. That's all fine right now. You can go and stalk him now, according to what Mark Merrill, etc. was suggesting. So this whole issue becomes so muddy when you start framing it in the way that these people, the people in charge of this fucking thing, have tried to frame it themselves. So let's go forwards with this. One of the problems is the way Mark Merrill described this is he kept putting it in terms of like, this is sort of like e-stalking, so like stalking online. This is kind of bullying Faker. Now, and it was always from these moral aspects, these moral imperatives, like something must be done. Like, first of all, the notion that Riot is so obsessed with protecting the players and their rights is hilarious in itself. Because, I mean, I could make an entire video about this, but as a very small aside, okay, players who are professional League of Legends player in the West, so in European LCS, North American LCS, can make hundreds of thousands of dollars by streaming themselves with a Twitch partnership or with a Zubu partnership if they get one from a Zubu, but through their own brand or through their team brand, they can make a lot of money being streaming presences, okay, and streaming regularly. Now, without knowing the breakdown, I would imagine, if I had to visualize, and just for the sake of a hypothetical now, imagine how Kesper's deal works with the Zubu, where it's not even that it's the team itself that's directly doing it. It's like a union of the people above the teams and the rest of it, this big mess of what Kesper is making the deal with the Zubu, then having the teams that are involved with them broadcast the stuff, and then the player, Faker, is on one of those teams. If I had to imagine the trickle down of how the money gets to Kesper, then gets over to the team, then gets down to the player, I would go ahead and guess, if I had to just imagine for a second, that Faker is making a minuscule amount of money for his streaming services that he's offering in comparison to almost all of these Western players, in terms of the numbers he's getting directly, or even maybe his deal on Azubu compared to other people who just stream on Azubu. So there's people on teams like Fnatic and do Fnatic do it anymore? Maybe Fnatic left. I know Rockat at some point in time. These people did in the past anyway. I would go ahead and suggest that he's making a minuscule amount. In fact, if you were just to look at it, now listen, people can do whatever deals they want, but if you were to look at it just from like ignoring what country people are from and the culture and how these deals were set up, you might even go as far as to suggest that maybe the way this Korean player is being dealt with through his whole system of how the deal's done might even be considered exploitative when you consider how much value he could have if he was this Western person doing it in this particular sense. Now obviously they have extra added aspects, like I've said, the personality, etc., that increase the value of your stream, but regardless, it would almost be considered exploitative how little he'd be making compared to here. In the same way as someone who makes pennies on the dollar, I don't know why I said on the dollar, who makes pennies per hour working in some sweatshop in Southeast Asia somewhere, a guy who does a similar job in North America and makes like whatever, $8 an hour, we'd consider that exploitative, that the other guy makes pennies per hour. Well, this is a similar scenario. So the fact that Riot themselves are using this as the case to show how they protect players and their rights, well, if you really want to start looking into player rights and are people getting a fair deal and are they being exploited, or is anyone like using this person's, then this is an ideal place to start. Don't start with the StarLotion guy. Have a look at this deal, mate. See if it's structured in a fair way. Seems like there could be grounds that it possibly isn't. So I just thought I'd bring that up as a starting point because it's a bit hilarious that this is the case that they're arguing over. Secondly, remember, Riot's own API and technology, and their own system, by the way, where they've promoted high elo streaming for a long time now, where when a big game's going on, it says Spectate now, and you click on it and you watch it. So essentially, they're promoting separate incidents of what they would now consider e-stalking or bullying. They're promoting separate individual one-off instances of that, where when that player, but because apparently you don't watch the next 4 games of that guy and only watch that guy and only watch his point of view, that's not e-stalking and bullying somehow. This is so arbitrary from their point of view that it's fucking ridiculous. This doesn't hold up on any sort of moral level because you're doing the same thing itself. Oh, but I diluted man a little bit and every now and then I don't e-stalk and bully him. Oh, well, fucking bully for you, mate. You're doing a great job there. So the idea that Riot are seeking to protect these people and that's their primary concern, it is their technology that is directly allowing this. Remember, the Star-Lord Lucian guy was not someone breaking into Faker's house, videoing his stream or getting like a secret cable and hooking it up at the back that like pumped the stream out and it went through his special hard drive that went into his computer. No, he was just taking Riot's technology here and applying it in a very specific way, which isn't disallowed in any sense. In fact, that first sentence I said before about the golden rule directly almost says you're allowed to do this. And so, hey, if you want to change that after the fact, you could say that, well, now we've changed that to an e-bullying thing. Well, first of all, how are you going to justify doing it yourself? Secondly, you can't retroactively apply it. So, well, see, I've changed it now, even though I said it was okay. So that makes what you did in the past when I said it was okay, e-bullying. Like, nah. See, you actually seem to have a very slippery, loose, almost, I mean, you just don't seem to have any grasp on actual moral issues themselves here. These aren't ideals that you're holding up in any sense. They don't have any grounds to them. In fact, it seems like you've seen ideals and morality seem like sort of like a hot air balloon that you saw flying away in the sky and you were like, gosh, I'd love to have a ride in that one day, but you've never actually gotten towards that and had any sort of grab on a rope that was pulling you in any way. You've never gotten inside the actual like basket of the hot air balloon. You know it'd be great to be involved with that, but you don't seem to actually understand what it is in any particular sense. And in some way, your own sort of like mandates that you've said previously dictate that like hot air balloons should all be shot down on sight, and if someone does that, that's just cool. You know, like what kind of world is this that these people live in? Going beyond that, if you want to talk about e-stalking and bullying, how about let's talk about bullying and talk about the president and co-founder of a company taking what his own company have essentially on some degree said is okay, but applying not legal laws, not themselves getting involved in the legal process and ensuring something's taken down, which is illegal, but just creating a moral fervor and constantly tar and feathering one guy as suggesting he's, it always said like essentially stealing, and this could be considered e-stalking, this could be considered bullying. So essentially, in some senses, suggesting he could be a thief or a stalker or a bully for doing these things in this particular sense that they themselves haven't so far implemented anything technologically to prevent. And apparently, based on some of the comments, may not, because there's other issues with that, which everyone fucking knows. That's why this doesn't make a lot of sense. To repeatedly do that, and using social media to do it when you have a large following, and then to do it when you haven't even looked into the matter, this seems negligent, it seems irresponsible, it seems antagonistic in terms of the tone of how it was done, it seems rude, offensive, this seems possibly morally wrong, quite frankly. This seems like bullying. This is online and some sort of equivalent of bullying. Now, it's not the same as bullying someone in real life, punching them in or whatever, but it's damaging to the person's character. It's certainly potentially turning people against them or rousing people's ire against them. This seems like bullying in itself. There's the issue of, does Faker want the stream done? This is another area where StarLordLucian kind of dropped himself in it, because I think at some point in time he supposedly suggested that if Faker himself said, I don't want it streamed anymore, then he would stop streaming it. Presumably because he's a fan of Faker and he thought, well, Faker's never going to do this, which is naive, because again, if you understand the way Kesper and the teams that Kesper has control over behave, Faker probably didn't have very much say in this. If I had to guess, and obviously I wasn't there, from my knowledge of Korean Brood War and seeing what's going on and talking to players behind the scenes and getting to know them after they leave Kesper teams, I would go ahead and suggest Faker had no say in this whatsoever. First of all, if Faker did want it, that's a separate issue that I'll get to in a second. But I would suggest that his team and Kesper made this decision for him, and his job wasn't to make the decision. It was to say, yes, that I also agree that is my decision. And so that's why it would be taken down in that sense. So that's not exactly the same anyway. And if you want to talk about the spirit of what someone said, as Riot apparently thinks is really important, that's not really the spirit of what he said when he said that if Faker didn't want it doing that, I'd have it taken down. Secondly, there's also a very small issue there, by the way, of the fact that Mark Morrell said that Faker didn't want to do it, and then it couldn't provide any sort of proof or any sort of communique to suggest as much, which made it sound as if he just said that and then hadn't actually looked into it himself. But we can't know for that. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. There's also the issue of, does Faker himself want the stream up? Well, that's irrelevant, isn't it? What would that have to do with legislation again, remember? Now, it might make it so that if Faker says, I'd really rather you don't do it, then as a neutral party, in this case, person watching this video now, you could say, oh, well, I actually think that if Faker doesn't want you to, then you shouldn't do. Right, well, that's your own opinion. That's not some more, you haven't defined anything special on moral grounds there. Because again, everyone has the ability to do this through the client itself. People can spectate and they can use this service OPGG and they can find out all this stuff and they can do it anyway. So Faker might not want it now. It could have been done before, has been done before by people. It will be done again in the future to other players. Why is Faker so special in this particular instance? Why does what Faker says go in this sense? He doesn't seem to have any moral right. He doesn't seem to have any legal right to demand this. It's actually irrelevant whether Faker says. And when I made the case before that this isn't Faker's content that's being streamed, it's just content within League of Legends, and he happens to show not the first person view, but his computer view of that third person character moving around, but with his clicks and with his overlay and with his camera. That's the stuff that's Faker's, that it's his right to talk about and that he can then license on because Riot's allowed him to do that. We're talking about a third-person view of it that happens to be in the game, but then the person happens to choose Faker, and then they happen to only stick with a locked camera on him. Now, when people get mad about that, again, what if the person just unlocked the camera, and then they showed Faker doing his action, then every now and then they just went to the gromps over here that would do nothing? Would that then somehow be okay? What if they show that, and then they show a different player for 38% of the game? I mean, this is getting into such an area where people themselves haven't even been able to define what's going on. And the fact that it's so murky suggests that there aren't any hard and fast moral rules, and legally this seems to be an area that hasn't had almost any work done into really defining the legal aspects of it. And that's why I think everyone's sticking with trying to get moral aspects themselves and not really defining it legally. So again, it's not up to Faker, and I've already mentioned the aspect of the Kesper deal and all the rest of it. It's also funny, just as a side note, to point out that based on the tone of Star-Lord Lucian's comments, the guy who runs the SpectateFaker channel, I actually think if we went back in the timeline to this channel exists, SpectateFaker, that shows these games, and this guy's a fan of Faker, if you could go back in time now, and all you could do is send a little video to that Star-Lord Lucian guy, of Faker himself, translated into English, let's say, saying, like, I know there's no legal precedent for this, and maybe morally this is a very grey area, but it's important to me that I stream through a Zubu, and listen, I'd just like to request, just as a personal favour, could you shut this channel down and not spectate me anymore? If that had been done as the first course of action, I actually get the sense, just my opinion from observing the situation, that actually the Star-Lord Lucian guy probably would have been flattered and would have been like, yeah, oh, sure thing, Faker, like, that's absolutely fine, mate. Instead, because this DMCA notice was issued, first of all, which doesn't seem to have legal grounds, as far as I can tell, then, because Riot, through Tryndamere and Mark Merrill, who unfortunately, in this sense, people are taking it as the Riot point of view, because he's a head guy at Riot, because their approach was so antagonistic, offensive, and just morally bogged down in aspects that didn't make sense to the case, and which then always completely it carried implications of some sort of lack of moral character on the part of, you know, some degradation of the character of the Star-Lord Lucian guy, because it was taken in this particular approach. First of all, on the legal grounds, they almost made it clear to the guy that actually he's fine doing it still, and secondly, they constantly dragged his character through the muck, that he was sort of like, well, fuck it, if there's some legal case, then I'm going to take this to the ends of the earth. Instead, you probably could have got this all resolved just by doing the Faker aspect initially. That's why you don't go the douchey route first when there are simpler routes. I mean, this is diplomacy. This is politics. I don't know how these people involved haven't understood that themselves. I know why they haven't. Because they thought, as bigger people, more famous people, as representative of big companies and big money interests, they could bully the little guy. They could just lean on him a bit and go, hey, listen, we'll get you locked up if you do this. He's like, really? Can you do that? But then he looks in, oh no, you can't do that. I can't actually. And then suddenly, you know what? They don't have another bullet in that gun. And then they're like, right, well, what you're doing is wrong. And everyone, look, this guy's essentially a thief. He's stalking him. You could sort of see he's bullying him. And by the way, that in itself doesn't work, to constantly keep saying it like that. Like, I noticed that phrasing there even suggests to me that Mark Merrill himself knows that there might be some sort of legal implication to himself if he had been found saying stuff like, this guy is a thief, he is stealing, he is stalking him, he is bullying him, because he always would tend to use those phrases like practically, essentially, sort of. And what's interesting about that is, once you've done it enough, I'm not even sure that would protect you entirely. Like, imagine if I just did a whole thing right now, and every time I mentioned Mark Merrill's doing this like this, I would just throw in there that, like, the way he's... I mean, I don't know. Let's make this hypothetical. Let's imagine Star-Lord Lucian is 16 years old. And so if I was to constantly say, like, the way he's essentially bullying this 16-year-old, so we'll call him a child, the way he's essentially bullying this child, the way he's sort of molesting his rights, he's essentially molesting his rights. You could sort of say he was a paedophile if I continually said it like that. Now, on the surface, there might not be anything wrong with the particular things I've said, but I'm going to be giving off a very particular sense to the person listening of it, and the words that they're going to be hearing constantly and associating with that person are then probably going to have an effect on how you think of them. And even if separately I hadn't put it directly like that, but at the end of every statement, okay, I kept saying all that stuff like, I don't agree with like what Mark Merrill's done and things he's said, and then at the end of the statement, technically not connected, as a separate sentence, I just put, And I also will not support the actions of the most vicious paedophiles to have ever been seen in this country. If I constantly did that, now I could go to court and go, oh, I wasn't talking about him. I definitely was not saying he's a paedophile. But I've repeatedly said paedophile and the guy's name a million times and associated them constantly and drawn the implication that in some way this is relevant because I'm constantly bringing up. That in itself seems like bullying and seems morally wrong, quite frankly, and is fucking unnecessary to this issue that should have been a legislative issue to begin with. Because here's an aspect people haven't brought up in this whole fucking element, okay? Aside from the fact it seems almost impossible to define that what the guy's doing was wrong and therefore shut it down without shutting down everyone's ability to spectate, because what's enabling this is the software, is the technology, the API that Riot themselves have created and provide to this day for us. So unless they want to shut that down for everyone, which they can, they're welcome to do it tomorrow, there's essentially, as far as I can tell, you can't define it, you can't probably even stop it. Because of that, you're left in a world where it's like, instead, let me think of it this way, okay? Because it's so hard to define, right? I said, okay, here's the biggest problem with all this, okay? Because it's so hard to define, you can't just find a simple legal answer. This is what you've seen when you've seen people pick it apart, even the lawyer guys. They've never come to some absolute conclusion that this would totally 100% hold them in court. By the way, that's not the way the legal system works. It works on precedents and how you argue a case. But in this particular case, okay, so if Riot really had a legal backing for this, and they could actually say this is legally wrong what you're doing right now, then why don't they just solve the problem? Why make it a moral issue? Why make it about bringing up the guy's character and putting this pressure on him? Why not just themselves issue a DMCA? Because remember, apparently they own, in some sense, the gameplay, etc. Why don't they issue the DMCA, get his channel taken down, problem solved, he can't stream on Twitch anymore, we can all go home? Why aren't they doing that? As far as we can tell, it's because they likely, it would seem, don't have a legal right to do that. So not only was the Zubu one not something that would legally hold up, but Riot themselves can't do that. Or they can't do it because they don't want the implications of what that would mean to apply to other things that they want to exist in the game, like the high elo spectating, other people in streams being allowed to show stuff. I mean, this is another reason why it's hard to define, because first of all, like I said, they themselves, in some sense, promote smaller session arbitrary cases of what they are, of high elo spectating, which they would now classify when it's done hardcore as e-bullying, as bullying and e-stalking. Yet they themselves facilitate that, allow it, and even promote it. I've already given the example before. Since people's issue is that you're showing the third-person camera of Faker's model doing all that stuff, then what happens if someone plays bot lane with Faker 10 games in a row duo queuing, regardless of whether he wants to, by the way? What's the legal right there of Azubu to tell that person to close it down or to say something like that? Secondly, is the issue there that my camera isn't centered on Faker? Okay, what if we do the SpectateFaker stream, but we have the guy manually move the camera around instead of actually just have it focus on the guy? Is that somehow okay now? Right, fuck it, let's go do that then. Problem solved, goodbye everyone, it's not a problem. See, this is why you can't nail it down. He even said that some of these statements are even hilarious because, like, they don't make sense if you actually think of what the original project is. Like, that's why I described it in terms of that line about the golden rule and the fan project, because essentially every single aspect of that fits with what Star-Lord Lucian's doing. So there was a line that Mark Morrell said where he said, I got it written down here, it feels like automated paparazzi. Now, first of all, again, why are you using these terms that carry these horrible implications to them themselves, except to do this to the character of the guy? It feels like automated paparazzi. If a player wants to opt out from automated and targeted rebroadcasting, why should we not honour their request? Right, paparazzi, that's not very a nice thing to say about a person, especially when you've yet to show they have legally done anything wrong. Secondly, if a player wants to opt out from automated and targeted rebroadcasting, right, automated and targeted. Okay, automated, first of all. I mean, as far as I can tell, Riot themselves allow people to spectate and promote people spectating them. How can the player opt out of that? Shouldn't the player have an option to opt out of that himself? Seems like Riot have repeatedly said they don't want to do that. They don't want to take away that ability for people to do it. Yet that's the entire crux on which this all rests. Automated and targeted rebroadcasting. Again, why is targeted the problem here? If the person shows Faker 2 games out of 10, let's say they show 100 games and Faker's just one of them, is that okay to have the camera locked on him? Okay, how about 2 out of the 100? Where is the line drawn here? And can you give us a distinct and hard and fast guideline here? I imagine not, from the way this is done. And then that part, why should we not honour their request to opt out? Okay, well, people have repeatedly said, well, in that case, I'd like it to be able to click a button, box rather, and then people can't spectate my games, are they, if I'm just in the server? Now, first of all, part of the reason, by the way, why they won't do that is because that will then fuck, if everyone really wanted to, that could then fuck everything up for every other streamer in the game. Like, Odd One maybe can't stream if like one person even in the game has that clicked. Faker can't stream anymore, potentially, if people want to be malicious to Faker. So they don't want to do that. And yet, essentially what's happening here is, if a player wants to opt out from automated and targeted rebroadcasting, why should we not honour their request? I don't know. Why aren't you honouring a request? People are asking you, can I please opt out of this automated and targeted rebroadcasting? Person who makes the game and the technology and the API that allows this to happen. Could I opt out, please? No, you can't. But you said, why would you not honour that request? Yeah, no, but I was only talking about in this one arbitrary case. Like, when it comes to everyone else, I don't allow you to opt out. No, but yeah, you said, why wouldn't you though? Like, you have to give me a reason as to why you wouldn't. Faker, Zubu, YOLO Swag, 420 money. Like, there's no reasoning given here. This is so arbitrary, this decision, and it doesn't make sense. Riot own the game, the rights to all content, and say that spectating is good because we can watch each other's play whenever we want to. I think I had this written down as well. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Well, one major difference is we, Mark Merrill's referring to Riot here, own the game and the rights to all content. Spectator mode adds a lot of value to the game. Remember, he's defending spectator mode existing. Adds a lot of value to the game. So you, the general populace, this is the plural. I'm educating people now. You can all watch each other play whenever you want. We think that interest trumps the interest of players to make money from streaming, but we are completely fine with people. I think he fucked that up. I think he meant we don't think that trumps the interest. But anyway, we think that interest trumps the interest of players to make money from streaming, but we are completely fine with people streaming as well. Maybe. I guess he isn't a problem then. Both can exist extremely well, as they both benefit the community in different ways. Now, here's the problem Mark Merrill has. He never stops to think, wait a minute, does the SpectateFaker Star-Lord Lucian channel fit into what I just said? Shit, it does. I probably should rephrase it. Nah, fuck it. It's like that guy, like, it's going out that way. You know that joke of, like, if you're in a factory and you just fuck something up, like you purposely misspelled, like, the way the beans company's made, so, like, fart beans company, and then you show some other employee, like, it's going out that way just before like 10 million packages of it like ship out, and that guy's like, hilarious, that's gonna fuck with everyone. That's like almost like what Mark Merrill's doing himself on this shit here, because if you take what he just said there, let's fit the Star-Lord Lucian channel into it. Okay, Riot own the game and the rights to all content. Great. Spectator mode adds a lot of value to the game, so you can all watch each other's play whenever you want. Oh, so you mean that we can watch Faker play through the spectate mode whenever we want? Cheers, no problem then. Star-Lord Lucian channel, stay up. We'll have that all going all day, and it's not a problem. I'll go with his wording here if it was accurate. We think that interest trumps the interest of players to make money from streaming. Oh, do you? So in that case, it's more important that we can watch Faker play through this spectate mode than for him to stream and make money off streaming, that he might make more money if the spectate mode didn't exist. Well, again, you're providing an excellent legal grounds for what you're saying here, probably for the Star-Lord Lucian guy. As far as guy who knows nothing about law, knows. Let's look at the other part. But we're completely fine with streaming as well. So is everyone else. Everyone who watches the Star-Lord Lucian channel is perfectly fine with Faker streaming on Azubu. I even think Azubu's pretty good technology, actually, from what I've seen. And if I actually personally wanted to watch Faker's stream, I probably would watch his stream whenever I could to support Faker, and because it'd have extra stuff like his mouse clicks. So anyway, we think that's fine as well. Great. No one's disagreeing with that. Both can coexist extremely well. Oh, you mean like it does right now, where Faker makes the same money from Azubu. Maybe Azubu makes a bit less, but I'm sorry, that's reality. There's no legal precedent for them to shut all the shit down, so they don't. As they both benefit the community in different ways. You're absolutely right there, mate. You've got it spot on. See, really, I should have just like skipped to the end there and pretended like Mark Merrill came out with that as a final statement and he'd actually recanted everything, because that's what it sounds like, this fucking statement. When he says that, they can both benefit the community in different ways. Yes, they do benefit, and in different ways. One of them benefits in the sense that we get every game here, not just the ones where Faker's actually streaming on Azubu. We get games where Faker's playing solo queue and he's not streaming on Azubu. We get extra Faker content. As a fan project, isn't that great? More games of Faker. Secondly, Unfortunately, this sucks for Azubu, but this is a benefit. If someone doesn't want to watch Azubu's service, they don't like the streaming service there, and they want to watch Twitch instead, then they can watch an inferior version, which just a third person without the clicks and without the overlay. They can watch that on there. So in a sense, that offers a benefit there. I mean, as an extreme example, say someone for some reason couldn't load Azubu, then they'd be able to watch it on Twitch. That's one. And it's entirely different ways. There's almost never any area in which they overlap in terms of the benefit they offer, except that you can watch the third person model moving around. You can watch that on both, but again, you could watch that anyway if you were in the game with Faker. You could watch that if you were spectating the overall game. You could watch that if you're watching me stream as I'm in the game with Faker. There's a million ways you could get that same benefit, and as a result, that isn't a benefit unique to Starlord Lucian's stream and isn't something by which you should then be able to say he's stealing, he's stalking, bullying, and take the channel down. Going beyond that, don't worry, this isn't going to last too much longer. We're getting towards the end now. So Riot's kind of fall apart on their own ability to define it there and things that they've said in the past. He suggested that Riot has to stand up for people like Faker in this case, because who else could? Like, first of all, the tone of that is just like, Jesus Christ, could I vomit now? Like Riot's just like the fucking Jesus descended to earth, like, my children, I know that you are just mere mortals who commit sin and are tainted by this world. You cannot love each other. You cannot behave the way I have taught you and told you to behave, the moral way. Therefore, who else could come to earth and solve this problem except I, the Lord, Jesus himself, who knows better than you and should be believed for everything I say. I am the moral arbiter who you should follow and will define how you should live your lives. I will now use the word should, could, and use words like potentially, vaguely, and essentially for horrible things I say about other people who don't do what I say. Now, in this particular sense, there was a line where it's like, just as a general position, it comes off as quite kind of distasteful and a bit obnoxious whenever Riot takes that tone. Stay in your fucking lane, mate. Protect your own legal rights. Act on your own legal rights when you want to. When someone's an LCS player and you've got them under contract, do whatever you can do within your legal rights, whatever guidelines you want. Be an arsehole if you want. That's one of the things I've never understood about Riot. Riot could do these things that are within their rights and say, that's legally within my right, I don't care what you think, I'm going to do it anyway. Instead, what they insist on doing, it always has to be presented as like, listen, I could do that, but I wouldn't just do it because of that. I'm doing it because this is the right thing. Open brackets, implication, if you don't agree with this, you're in favour of the wrong thing and you're doing the wrong thing. That's the way it was always presented. It's never like a spectrum and this is just an opinion on it. This is the moral thing. That's why I'm doing it. I only do it for moral reasons. You know what? If it just so happens someone makes more money from this, who's a partner of mine, who's involved with mine, if this is a really famous player, that's not why I'm doing it. Even though then people sort of say like, why you only do this because it's Faker? Well, of course they are. No, I'd do this for any other person. Really, would you now? It seems very unlikely because essentially I could have been doing this forever with a Twitch stream that had only one person watching it, my friend, streaming one random guy, constantly e-stalking and bullying him on his thing there, regardless of the fact he doesn't have the Azubu stream, etc. And you wouldn't have shut it down. In fact, you wouldn't even pay any attention to it. Odds are you couldn't even get through to you on this, because otherwise we could all do sort of like a DDoS on Riot's ability to do anything by constantly harassing them with saying, hey, someone's watching my stream, and 40 million of us could do that and grind Riot to a fucking halt as they had to morally clean up all this stuff. It's the same reason why, as a general point, people don't like it when America as a country has issues where they go into other countries, they go and liberate countries or whatever. It's not so much the issue of what they're doing, it's that it's always presented as we're doing this because it's the right thing. But then someone will be like, oh, but wasn't there sort of like a business interest in doing this? And wasn't there some political thing that you gained from doing it, etc.? But they'll never admit that that's involved in it. They'll always say, no, that's just incidental. That's a coincidence almost. I'm doing it for this moral reason. And then someone could be like, well, in that case, why aren't you stopping a similar thing happening in Iran or in China? And they'll be like, sorry, didn't hear you. Freedom. Like they don't address. That's where it falls apart, because it's obnoxious. It's not really clearly the main reason you do it. Now listen, it might be a bonus that you can get these business interests on and this sort of thing. In the same way for Riot here, it might be a bonus to help Azubu and to lean in their favour a little bit, and to help Kesp out, to help SK Telecom, and help Faker out. It might be in their interests to do that directly, and it might be a nice bonus that they feel like it's the moral thing to do, which I'm not entirely sure they do, because some of their own statements don't match up with things they themselves have said since on the matter and previously when trying to define this issue. So I'm not sure that is the case, but that's definitely, I think that's the one thing we can rule out. That's definitely not their primary motivator and the only thing like keeping them up in the day, like, I've got to protect the players and the fans and everyone. Because, like I say, if that was the main thing, the most important thing in the world is stopping Faker being e-stalked and bullied, etc., and people stealing his content, then just go ahead and have a button where he can click it and people can't spectate his games. We've solved that problem overnight. Oh, but then what about the other stuff? Nah, but if there's one thing we wouldn't want, it's to facilitate people e-stalking and bullying when we haven't got something in place to stop that in the ways that we now will define in very smart, extreme detail, and maybe we'll even set up some sort of legal precedent. No, they haven't done any of that stuff. Apparently they don't care when it comes to that stuff. It's just this arbitrary issue. Another general trend about this is it's been a bit of a PR nightmare. Not only because Tryndamere started just firing off at the mouth before he had any clue about even the basics of it. Then, secondly, because he essentially repeatedly attacked the character of someone in quite a horrible manner when he had no real basis to do that, apart from the fact he doesn't like what that guy's doing. He disagrees with that guy's choices. Therefore, he can just attack that guy's character over and over and over again, apparently. That's just fine, is it? That in itself is kind of gross. Then there's the aspect that, insert joke here. So a guy that they named the champion Tryndamere after isn't particularly adept at spinning and escaping from problems. Good little joke for you there. Not really, it's just all right. Then there's another joke that we'll throw in here that, guys, Faker is such a great player. You know when you're like a really great competitor, you can just psych someone out by looking at them, by the things you say in the pre-game interview. That gets in their head and messes with them. Faker's such a great player that even when he just plays on solo queue and isn't even streaming it, his play can have the knock-on effect of actually tilting the guy, one of the guys who was a founder and president of the company that made the game. He can just set that guy on full bore tilt, going off, potentially fucking up his own career in terms of public perception, and maybe even getting some lawsuits against him if anyone wanted to on the grounds of things that he's said. He can actually tilt a guy to that much. If that isn't a great example of some hashtag just Faker things, I don't know what it is. Maybe that's the solution to defeating Riot, guys. It's the TSM Samsung White approach. Just hashtag just tilt them. There's also the issue that actually what's interesting about this is when people attack the fact that Tryndamere was so open about it, he himself only a few months ago made this Reddit post where he talked about the fact that what Riot's communication philosophy was. And his philosophy was that they would be real people and they'd just give their opinions and they wouldn't have like someone like a spin doctor tell them how to phrase this in a very PR manner. And what's funny is that itself is what's backfired on them. Now, I actually like that in general. I like the idea that people say what they think and actually give their own reasons and try to appeal to what they think. Now then, that doesn't mean they're protected from looking like a fucking moron and coming off repeatedly ill-informed, uneducated on the topic, actually willfully ignorant that they keep saying rebroadcasting fucking again and again. Like, stop saying that. No one is rebroadcasting anything, mate. They're broadcasting from a different point of view, technically. The fact that they do that, well, you're not immune to looking like a fucking moron when you say what you want with free speech. But I agree that it should exist. I even like the approach to try and be more human like this. You've just fucked it up in a massive sense because of how you've represented your own company, unfortunately, in that particular sense. Let me think. Was there anything else? I think we've almost covered everything here. Let me just quickly check if there was anything else here. Oh yeah, I think one more thing to throw in. This general trend of like, he even said, it's not cool to bully players, period. We've always had this stance. First of all is the Kesper issue, where you could make a sort of case that maybe Kesper in some sense bullies people or pressures people or denies them profits that otherwise they would be entitled to if they hadn't been denied information or were in a culture that just set up so you can't get that in that sense. You could you could question whether Riot actually does do it in that sense. Then you could ask yourself, okay, it's not cool to bully players, period. Well, what about when Riot, as far as I know, had no legal right to ask players to stop streaming games, yet we're in the processes of trying to get that through. But then when caught doing that, and it was exposed by the great work of journalists in our scene, reversed their position and said, like, this was just a mistake, this was never really planned to go through, like, we're glad you guys are on board with what we ourselves internally just happened to have also decided was the right thing to do. We definitely wouldn't stop them streaming other games. Again, they had no legal right to do that, because it hadn't been in the contract that they were, as far as I can tell, going to update to include this. But first of all, the spirit of that is very much kind of bullying and forcing a player to do something only in your own business interest. And then there's the issue of the fact that not only are you bullying in this particular sense, but you're making them do it when it's in their off hours, when they're not working for you, when they're not working for their team, they now couldn't even stream other games. You're limiting their ability to earn money, even through streaming. Oh gosh, the bloody irony, of this particular sense. Riot themselves were employing this. And that's another reason to tie into it as to why I don't like this whole Riot does these things to be right and they're all about doing the right thing and all the rest of it. Because they're also so dishonest in terms of how they present those things. That just reminds me of in America where they were trying to get all that stuff through the government, like sort of Patriot Act type stuff, or when they had the SOPA stuff to shut down the internet, the CISPA, when they were trying to get this stuff through and it was initially opposed, then the government were all sort of like, oh yeah, sorry about that. Like, we don't want to spy on people and shut the internet down. So, that was just like a mistake in how it was done. And then everyone's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, we can get back to normal life now. And then they were like, ram it through in any other way you can, apply it to any bill you can. Like, it's that sort of thing. Riot only stopped it when it was so overwhelmingly against it that's when they decided not to. So they caved to it. Where was the morality here? Remember, this is what their primary motivator is, morality. They're all about doing the right thing and morals and all the rest of it. But apparently only when it lines up with business interests, very specific cases where they don't understand the case. Also, let me ask you that as a question. If Mark Merrill had these very strong opinions on what should and shouldn't be done before he knew any of the real details, the primary ones, because remember the crux of the issue is what I said about their technology allowing this streaming by the Star-Lord Lucian guy. To this day, you can still do it now. Because he didn't understand the particulars of any of that and yet had these super hard opinions. Wow, well, what a coincidence that then when he informed himself to some degree on the issue, all of his initial points of view and stances morally all still lined up. Well, that's just so fucking convenient, isn't it? You didn't know the particular case. You were going around throwing around terms like that. And then you looked into it and you know what? You didn't have to back down at all. Well, that's just bloody great for you, isn't it? You're just the luckiest guy in the world. Other people might have looked into it and thought like, ooh, maybe I went a bit too far saying that. Maybe I should come back. Maybe I should rein in a bit there. You know what? I might actually be wrong legally on that ground, so I won't say it like that. Is it actually morally right to sort of throw in these moral implications about something that isn't even defined, and I'm allowing and in some cases facilitating myself? Isn't there a moral implication? No, none of these questions are apparently asked, ever addressed. That's one of the biggest problems in all of this. Then as a very small side note, he then also did the classic PR move, and by the way, PR move I mean like PR suicide, of just retweeting almost anyone, it seemed, who just agreed with him or said he was doing the right thing on his Twitter feed, but in a manner where he didn't even retweet it. Like they'd stated it in a similar manner to him, and it logically checked out. Some of them, I'm sure, are things it actually word for word he wouldn't agree with, yet he was sort of providing some sort of association with himself by putting on his Twitter feed, and just essentially, if you just sort of agreed with him, he just retweeted you. Like that in itself adds into this whole obnoxious PR nightmare of this whole case. So I think I've managed to bring my own kind of perspective to this and kind of put the emphasis in the argument where I think it needs to be. Because at the end of the day, to make it very simple, if this really was some legal right of Azubu, Faker, Kesper, SK Telecom, or Riot to stop this, then they could stop it. They could stop it now. It'd actually be fairly easy to stop it. It'd be quite hard for the Star Lucian guy to keep going against it. And I would imagine that if they could, this would be their first course of action. Just like Azubu didn't contact the guy and say, could you please not do this because morally we feel like it's not that good and maybe Faker wouldn't like it. Instead, they thought they had the legal right, so they went ahead and did it. Or they thought they could bully a guy and he wouldn't understand the legal right and they could put pressure on him. So this is what's suspicious about it. If they really did have that, I think they could solve the problem overnight. If Riot really did care more about someone not being e-stalked and e-bullied and all that sort of shit, and people not stealing their content, then they would put this option in very quickly. That could be a very quick fix to not allow you to spectate the games, to not have the high ELO streaming aspect, to not allow OPGG to take the stuff from their API. They'd very quickly do all that, but they don't want to do that because there's a whole world of other stuff, part of which keeps League of Legends big and going, which they want to exist. They just want to arbitrarily choose this one position of this one guy and say, because you keep the camera locked in him, because you follow the same guy every game, that somehow is wrong, and we want that stopped. And we don't have any legal way to stop you right now, but we'll just keep going on and on about it and keep piling mud on you until everyone hopefully agrees and you just break and give in. I don't really see how that's fair or legal or right myself. So there's the spectacular SpectateFaker Tiltfest 2K15 signing out.